Right? Pretty much. That's what I want. All right. So communication, language, music. All right. What music communicates is debatable. We could discuss that forever. You know, there's different ideas on that, but I think pretty much it does. We would probably agree that in some way it does communicate something, which explains why we have music at all. I mean, why would we have, quote, invented music as a human species if it didn't have some kind of purpose, didn't fulfill some need that we have? Okay, so that's kind of a logical, if you kind of take it down to the bottom. Okay, so now as a language, every language has its own rules, right? Its own component parts. They usually, well, they used to teach back in the old days, when you learned grammar, you learned what a verb was and what an adjective was and all that stuff. And you learn certain order, what we call syntax, and the way things are ordered in this particular language. Then you start to study a different language, and you see the rules are slightly different. But there are rules, right? So the sort of the comparable thing in music for cadences, what we call cadences, is they are stopping points. All right? And if you sort of a student of mine, I'm always going to tell you when you're playing something, I'm going to say, where's this going? Where are you going with this? Like at any moment musically, where's this melody? What's the goal for it? And the goal is always some kind of cadence, which is kind of a resting point or a final point. So in the sort of the comparison between language and music, cadences are pretty important. So that's why we study them. They are basically punctuation points. Right? If you think of it that way, it all makes perfectly good sense. Because, you know, you go from here to there, and you finish the idea, period. Right? And we have cadences that correspond to that. We have other cadences that when you feel like the thought is not over, comma, because there's more to come, right? So you have a different kind of cadence that kind of fulfills that purpose. So that's what that's all about. So, quick review. The only chords that you're going to use, so this is relatively easy, are those.
Wow.
Yeah, it's exciting. Okay. That does not mean to suggest that those are the only possible chords for cadences. All right? But those are the ones that you're supposed to. So you don't have to sort of think past that. Okay, so it's all about the combination of those cadences. The most common one, of course, is, you know, whoa. So you get this bump, da bump. Okay, when you hear that, you know something's end. Okay. Now, here's for all you thinkers out there, and there's 20 some odd, you would start to ask yourself, well, okay, why? When I hear that boom boom, why do I feel like something's over? Yeah.
Because, well, I think that that's just associated with endings in some scenarios.
That's the word, association. Yeah. So here's the question: Is it something inside of the human being that responds to that, or is it more simple, like he's suggesting, is because every time you heard that boom boom, it's over. So you think, okay, boom boom, over, boom boom, over, boom boom. Yeah. So you sort of associate those two things together, like a dog, right? Or if you grab the dog's leash, the dog knows, hey, we're going outside. Because every time you grab the leash, you actually go outside. So the dog associates that. Okay, so, but that's another different discussion. It doesn't really matter, but it seems to work that way. So the 5-1 combination, okay, seems to be the most final. And in some books they call it final cadence. Some books they call it the perfect cadence. I think in this book they call it authentic, right? So, whatever. You know, I don't care what you call it. All right, so I don't know if that is any better than calling it perfect or anything else. Okay, so that's usually what you hear at the end. That's more like a period. Okay. When you hear it backwards, right? Okay. What that suggests is something like, you know, in music we always do stuff like, yeah. And the other thing that you would notice with that is the balance. Again, human beings like symmetry. So if you have 2 bars here, you want to hear another 2 bars there because it feels right. When it's upset, you know, like 2 bars and then 3 bars, we're not used to that. I mean, that's a standard, sort of a standard formula that's been working for a couple of 100 years. It works in Mozart, it works in pop music. I mean, most pop music is extremely conservative, if I can say that to you. Because you always think, you know, pop music is cool and it's the latest stuff. But it's in fact extremely conservative because it follows the same basic rules that have been used for so long. And the reason why it does that is because they work. That's the only reason. Anyway, so you get that idea. And then you get an answer. Alright? And you'll notice what that was all about. One was on the tonic chord. And then you have a dominant 7. Okay? So tonic, dominant tend to balance each other. Okay. When you flip it around, that's like a comma. Because when you land on the chord 5, it feels like it's not finished. It's like the door is still open. And then so usually what you get is a 4-bar phrase that ends with 5, and then another phrase that ends with 1. So it kind of balances out. And we'll be talking about that because you need to understand that when we go beyond, when we go into the composing part here. Because there's a creative chapter. They'll give you 4 bars and they say you compose another 4 bars that make sense. So you're going to have to put on your composer pants or whatever. Yeah.
For the composing, would there be a right answer?
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Because now we get into the realm of where we are in harmony, where there's not necessarily one right answer for things. So it becomes kind of subjective. But if you understand a few basic principles, that's really what they're trying to get across. Because I could give you, a harmony exercise, and I get back 20 different answers, and 5 are really, really good. Another 5 are okay, correct, technically correct, but not, really inspired. So, like, where's that line? A lot of it is subjective. So that's the kind of thing that you'll be sort of dealing with in harmony. Basically, we want everything to be mechanically correct, and that's basic. That's the bottom line. Some of you will get 90, some of you will get 80. And where does 80 become 90? Well, it's going to be a lot from basically me, what feels more interesting musically and stuff like that. But that's a different discussion. Okay, the other combination is 4 to 5. Okay, and those are called, we used to call those imperfect. Now they call them, does anybody remember? I don't even remember.
What are they, Playgol?
No?
Half.
Yeah, half Ks. See, smart guy. I don't even remember from last year. Okay? And today, it's Playgol. So, that combination is 4 to 1. Okay, now the first thing to just register what I've just written there is you either end with 5 or 1. Period. There's no ending in 4. Okay? So 4 never comes as the final form. So 5 or 1. And register those. Okay, so that's what you're dealing with. All right. So here's the mechanics. Okay. Roll, what's your favorite key?
I remember it complicated like that though.
C major? Okay, we can't use C major.
G.
G major. Okay, G sounds good. Okay, so first I want to know what the triads are. So in the key of G major, the tonic triad. The tonic triad, 3 notes. Do, mi, sol, bass. Thank you, GB. Okay, those are the chords those are the notes you're going to use. Okay, what would the subdominant be? Miles knows. You should pay attention, Miles, because this is going to come your way. What's the subdominant? Chord 4 in G major. Give me 3 notes. Yeah.
Good job, Miles.
Okay. Dominant.
Oh.
Okay. 5th note of G major. Use your fingers. Okay. All right. So G, A, B, C, D. Now make a triad. D, skip a note, boom, skip a note, boom. Yeah, and you skip that, right? So G, F sharp, A. I won't say F because we're gonna just assume that. Okay, these notes here are the root, right? These notes here are the 3rd. These notes here are the 5th. That's how we refer to them because they are a 3rd above the bass, a 5th above the bass. Okay, that's where we get those little figures. 5-3 indicates a root position chord. Okay. All right, let's do 5-1. Okay. I'm just going to do whole notes. We'll forget about, don't worry about rhythm and stuff like that. Okay, number 1. Root in the bass. Now, we're going to write 4 parts. We're going to have soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. So the magic is that out of a triad, we're going to have 4 notes. How is that possible from last year? Right, we double the root. Not necessarily the sign, the root. Yeah. So in other words, in this chord here, root and the bass. So the root of that chord is D. All right. Okay, now on top of that, we're going to have another D, an F sharp, and an A. Now, where do you put them? Well, there's different ways to do this. The simplest way, from what you would probably still remember from last year, was keyboard style. And what that meant was you have one note in the bass, clef, you would play that with your left hand, and then 3 notes up here. All right? And generally what we do is we put these guys as if you could play it. In other words, it should fit under your hand, which would mean all within an octave. So, here's an example. I'll keep it simple. D, F sharp, A. Okay? So 2 Ds, F sharp, A. I could also write it this way. D, D, F sharp, A. Okay? I could also write it this way. Now all those different ways, it's the same chord, it's the same inversion, root position, because the root is the lowest note. The only difference is what we call arrangement. Okay, so that's the kind of stuff you're going to be doing in harmony. You're going to have to decide, which note will the soprano sing, which note will the alto. That's it. Okay? So, in keyboard style, it looks like that. You got 3 guys up here, 1 down there. Okay. Then you're going this way. Tonic chord, G in the root. Okay? So, I can pick this G, I can pick that G, doesn't matter, really. Okay, so, now, moving this, now you have to think this way. So, that's what happens in harmony. You have to consider vertical, notes and so on, and then you have to consider what we call voice leading, like who's going where. Because now you have this element as well when you move from one chord to another. So the basic thing is as smooth as possible. Okay. Now, the first thing that occurs to me is there is a common note between this chord and that chord. So the most fundamental sort of principle is leave the common note where it is. So what's the common note? D. Yeah, they both have a D. Okay? So leave it where it is as an exercise. Okay, so now I need to have 2 G's, 1 B, and 1 D. So I got a D, I have a G. So I need another G, and I need a B. Okay, so just think about that. This guy could go up to a G. This guy could go down to a G. Now, your first choice is not necessarily your best choice. So this is where we get into the harmony game. You have to be juggling possibilities. All right? So you have to think. First choice is not always necessarily the best. For example, if I go down here, okay, the missing note is B. So now where does the soprano go? We want to keep things as smooth as possible. So the solution here would be soprano goes up. That guy goes there. Okay? So if you're given this, that would be the best choice. And it's always that sort of idea. If you have this, then what's the best solution? That's what becomes tricky for you in terms of harmony, because you have to make choices. And for some of you, it's going to be confusing. Like here, if I say what's the major third above A? Well, that's it. There's only one answer. Whereas if I give you a harmony thing to solve, there could be 5 different answers. You know, and two of the solutions may be slightly better than the other three. So then it becomes a little bit tricky, and some, you know, you have to make a decision and so on. And it's like a chess game. Every time you make a decision, it affects what you can do next and what you can't do. All right, according to, quote, the basic principles of traditional harmony. Okay, so there's one sample. Now we could have had this guy, you know, that F, if that F was down here, he would do that. So it doesn't change. All right, if you do enough of these, you will notice the following, that one guy stays put and the other two move in the same direction. If you have that, 90% sure that you've got it done correctly. Okay? Okay. Now if we did one, let's say if we did 1-5, okay, I could do that backwards, but let's just do it differently. So G, suppose it's low, right? So G, G, B, D, right? Two G's, B, D. All right, common note is this guy here, and D, F, D, F sharp A. So you would go that route. So again, two guys stay put, the other two move in the same direction. And you would certainly, if your phrase ended with that, you'd certainly feel that it's not finished. Because you would end, if you're in G major, you ended this way. All right? You'd still want to hear that, which would come later on. So that's where you get the half. Okay. Now, the other half is this one here. This one's a little bit tricky. Okay, there's a principle in sort of traditional harmony, and we'll try to explain it. But everybody who studied harmony will probably remember one thing, and that is you try to avoid what we call parallel fifths and parallel octaves. Okay, there's a good reason for that, and it's historical, and I won't sort of get into that, but it has a good reason for it. And if somebody explains to you, then it makes sense. But the idea of fifths, okay, composers were not thrilled with that. It did evoke older music. And it's not that they didn't like older music, it's just that when Beethoven is writing his Symphony number 3 in 1802 or whenever it was, he's the new music. In other words, you have to think about that. When he's writing that, there's nothing that has existed past him. All he has is Mozart and Palestrina behind him. Okay? He's on the cutting edge of what's happening musically. Right? So he wants to forge his own direction. Fifths kind of evoke the older style of music. So they try to avoid it. Did somebody write a harmony book? Yeah, but much later. In other words, just by consensus, composers started to avoid these fifths. And then eventually everybody said, yeah, that fifth sound is really kind of old and it's outdated, and we want to do something more, modern and cool and awesome, rather than evoke older stuff. So they avoided it. Then eventually people, they came around and looked at music and said, well, what do composers do when they have the progression 4 to 5? Almost consistently, the idea is to go in the opposite direction. And what that does is it avoids the fifths. Okay? So that's what you have here. I'll show you in a minute. Okay, chord 4. So, chord 4, 2 C's, 1 E, 1 G. So it could look like that, for example. Okay, so now the idea would be this guy's going up. If this C goes up to D, then you have what we call parallel octaves. If that G goes up to the A, then you have parallel fifths. All right. So the solution was everybody go down. Go down to the closest note. So D, F sharp, A. All right. So for 4 to 5, soprano, alto, tenor. Now, best way to go. All right. Now, the question is, it always comes up in harmony class. Well, what's wrong with this? The answer is there's nothing wrong with it. Okay? But you just have to understand why. You know, I think in any discipline, whether it's, you know, you're going to engineering or medicine or whatever, or even accounting, you learn basic theory, right? How things generally are done. And those things have been figured out over the course of many generations, because they work. Once you understand that, then you can start bending rules and breaking rules if you come up with something better. Right? So anybody can break rules. So we teach you the basic principles, and then you can sort of decide what you want to do yourself. You want to compose stuff? Well, you got to compose whatever sounds good to you, and that's perfectly legit. But you have to have a base. You got a starting point. Okay, so these fifths, those were basically avoided. All right, last one. Today, Mr. Plingle. So that would be C down to G, or up to G. So you can go up there or down here. Let's go down here. Okay, so C, E, G. So I need another C. Let's do, I'm going to use that one, same thing there. And then G, you can keep the G. See, there's no common note here between 4 and 5. All right, because everything's moving up. But this one here, you have the G. So G, B, G. All right, so there you go. That will sound not quite as final as that, but it will sound, it should make you reasonably happy. All right? It's also amongst church musicians known as the Amen. Right? So at the end of your business, okay, so 5-1, 1-5, 4-5, 4-1. Those are the guys that you're responsible for. Now, with the help of my handsome assistants,
Well, what did I get you?
I really got out there.
yeah.
Thank you.
Wait, running out of film?
One of my